In 1987, Clint Eastwood was driving through Carmel when he saw an elderly woman sleeping in a car parked behind the public library. She was 82 years old. Her name was Margaret Chen, and 35 years earlier, she'd been Clint's piano teacher. What Clint did when he recognized her, and what happened 3 days after he finished building her a house, became one of those stories about timing and gratitude, and how sometimes you arrive just in time, and sometimes just too late. Margaret Chen had been teaching piano in Carmel since 1948. She was a classically trained pianist, born in San Francisco in 1905 to Chinese immigrant parents. She'd studied at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, had ambitions of performing professionally, but in the 1920s and 1930s, opportunities for Chinese-American female pianists were essentially non-existent, so she taught. She was brilliant at it, patient, demanding, able to see potential in students who didn't see it in themselves. She taught out of her small house in Carmel, charging whatever families could afford. Sometimes $2 per lesson, sometimes nothing. In 1952, a 22-year-old Clint Eastwood was living in the Carmel area, working odd jobs, trying to figure out what to do with his life. He'd been drafted, served in the army, and was now back in California with no clear direction. He had a little money saved, not much, and was working construction and lifeguarding. A friend suggested he take piano lessons. You should learn an instrument. It's good for discipline, and women love musicians. Clint had never played piano, didn't particularly want to, but he had some free time and a little money, so he looked up piano teachers in Carmel and found Margaret Chen's advertisement in the local paper. Piano instruction, all levels, reasonable rates. He called, she answered. Her voice was formal but kind. Have you played before? Never. Good. No bad habits to break. Come Tuesday at 4 p.m. Clint showed up Tuesday at 4 p.m. to a small, modest house filled with books and sheet music. Margaret Chen was 47 years old then, a small woman with graying hair pulled back, wearing a simple dress and glasses. Her hands were elegant, long-fingered, clearly made for piano. Sit, she said, gesturing to the piano bench. Clint sat. She sat beside him. First lesson is free, she said. If you like it, we continue. If you don't, no obligation. But while you're here, you give me your full attention. Understood? Understood. She taught him hand position, posture, how to read the simplest notation. She was patient but firm, corrected him without making him feel stupid. When the hour was up, she said, you have potential. You're coordinated. You listen. Come back next week. $1 per lesson. I can pay more than that. I charge what people can afford. You're working construction. $2 is fair. Clint came back the next week, and the week after, for 6 months, from fall 1952 through spring 1953. Clint took piano lessons from Margaret Chen every Tuesday at 4 p.m. He wasn't a natural. He practiced inconsistently, but he learned. More importantly, he learned discipline from her. She'd make him play a passage 50 times until his hands hurt. If you're going to do something, do it right. Half effort is wasted effort. She also talked to him about life during those lessons. About finding purpose, about not drifting. You're smart, she told him one afternoon in March 1953, but you're aimless, you need direction. I'm figuring it out, figure it out faster. You're 22. Time moves quicker than you think. In May 1953, Clint got an opportunity to work in Los Angeles, acting, small parts, nothing guaranteed, but it was something. He told Margaret he'd have to stop the lessons. Good, she said. Go find your purpose. But remember, whatever you do it with discipline. Half effort is wasted effort. He thanked her, paid her for the final lesson. She refused to take the money for that last one. You gave me 6 months of your attention. That's payment enough. Clint left Camel for Los Angeles. He stayed in touch with Margaret for a few years through occasional letters, but by the mid-1950s, as his life got busier, the correspondence faded. He didn't forget her, but life moved on. Margaret continued teaching piano in Camel year after year, decade after decade. She never married, never had children. Her students were her family. She charged whatever they could afford, sometimes $5 per lesson, sometimes nothing for a family struggling financially. By the 1980s, Margaret was in her late 70s, still teaching, but making very little money. The house she taught in for 35 years was sold when the landlord decided to cash out on Camel's rising property values. At 79, Margaret couldn't afford rising rents in Camel. She moved to a smaller apartment, then an even smaller one. By 1987, at age 82, Margaret Chen was living in her car, 1979 Honda Civic, parked behind the Camel Public Library. She'd shower at the community center, eat cheap food, spend her days in the library reading, sleep in her car at night. She told no one. She was too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to let people know that after 60 years of teaching piano, she'd ended up homeless. On a Tuesday afternoon in October 1987, Clint Eastwood drove past the Camel Library. He'd been living in Camel 4 years by then, was mayor of the town, one of the most famous people in the world. He noticed a car parked behind the library with someone sleeping inside. It wasn't unusual. Camel had some transient population, but something made him stop. He parked, walked over to the car, looked through the window. The elderly woman sleeping in the back seat, covered with a thin blanket, surrounded by a few belongings in plastic bags, was Margaret Chen. Clint stood there for a moment, not quite believing it. His piano teacher, the woman who taught him discipline, the woman who charged him $2 per lesson, because that's what he could afford. She was living in a car. He knocked gently on the window. Margaret woke up, disoriented. Saw someone standing outside her car. Sat up quickly, frightened. Then she recognized him. Even at 82, even after 35 years, she recognized Clint Eastwood. Clint opened the door. "Miss Chen." "Clint." Her voice was small, embarrassed. "How long have you been living in your car?" She looked down. "A few months." "Why didn't you reach out to anyone?" "I'm fine. I manage." "You're living in a car, Miss Chen. You're not fine." She started to cry, quietly, the tears of someone who'd been holding everything together for months and finally had someone see her. "Come with me," Clint said gently. "Right now. Get your things." He took her to a hotel that afternoon, checked her into a suite, made sure she had food, clothes, everything she needed. Then he called his assistant. "Find me a property in Camel. Small house. Good neighborhood. Quiet. I need it by the end of the week. For you. For someone who needs it." By Friday, Clint's team had found a small cottage in Camel. 2 bedrooms, garden, walking distance to downtown. It needed work updating, repairs, painting. It would take about 3 weeks to make it perfect. "Buy it," Clint said, "and hire a crew. I want it ready in 3 weeks." While the house was being renovated, Margaret stayed in the hotel. Clint visited her every few days. They'd talk. She told him about the years of teaching, about losing her house, about the shame of ending up in her car. "You taught me discipline," Clint said during one visit. "You charged me $2 per lesson when you could have charged more because you believed in fairness. You gave me something I needed when I had nothing. This is me paying that back. You don't owe me anything. I'm not doing this because I owe you. I'm doing it because I can, and because you deserve better than sleeping in a car at 82. 3 weeks later, the cottage was finished. Fully renovated, furnished, stocked with food. A piano, a beautiful upright in the living room. On November 15, 1987, Clint took Margaret to her new house. She walked through the door unstopped, stared at the piano, at the cozy living room, the kitchen, the bedroom with a real bed, the garden outside. She cried, deep, shaking sobs. This is mine. It's yours. Paid for, no rent, no mortgage, yours. She sat at the piano, put her hands on the keys, played a few notes, then played a full piece Chopin, something she'd played for 60 years. I never thought I'd have a piano again, she whispered. Clint stayed for dinner that night. They talked about his career, about her students over the years, about life. She seemed happy, settled, safe. Thank you, she said as he was leaving. I don't have words. You gave me direction when I needed it. This is me making sure you have safety when you need it. 3 days later, on November 18, 1987, Margaret's neighbor noticed she hadn't picked up her newspaper, knocked on the door, no answer. The neighbor called the police. They entered the house. Margaret Chen was sitting in her favorite chair, facing the piano. She died peacefully in her sleep, 2 days after moving in. The coroner said it was heart failure, natural causes. She'd simply gone to sleep and didn't wake up. Clint got the call that afternoon. He drove to the cottage, stood in the living room where Margaret had played piano just 3 days earlier. On the piano, she'd left a note. It was addressed to him. Clint, thank you for giving me a home. I spent 60 years teaching students and ended up with nothing. But these 3 days in this house, with this piano, gave me more peace than I've had in years. If I die tomorrow, I'll die happy. You gave me that. Thank you for remembering me, Margaret. The note was dated November 17th, the day before she died, as if she'd known. Clint stood there reading it, feeling the weight of timing. 3 days. She'd had 3 days in the house he'd built for her. Part of him wished he'd found her sooner, given her months or years in that house instead of just days. But another part understood she died happy, safe, in a home with a piano. After months of sleeping in a car, she'd spent her final days with dignity. At Margaret's funeral a week later, over 200 people attended. Former students, now in their 40s, 50s, 60s, people she taught piano to for $2 per lesson, or for free. People who'd learned discipline and music from a woman who'd given everything to teaching. Clint gave the eulogy. Margaret Chen taught me piano for 6 months in 1952 and 1953. I wasn't a very good student. I didn't practice enough, but she taught me something more important than piano. She taught me that half effort is wasted effort. That if you're going to do something, do it right. 35 years later, I found her living in her car. She'd given her life to teaching and ended up with nothing. So I built her a house, gave her a piano, gave her a place to be safe. She lived there for 3 days, then she died. Part of me wishes I'd found her sooner, given her years instead of days. But I read the note she left, and I realized she died happy. She died in a home. She died with a piano. After months of sleeping in a car, she spent her final days in peace. Sometimes we arrive just in time, sometimes just too late. But Margaret taught me that what matters is that we show up, we try, we do it right. She showed up for me in 1952 when I needed direction. I showed up for her in 1987 when she needed help. She had 3 days, but they were good days. And that matters. After the funeral, one of Margaret's former students approached Clint. She talked about you, the woman said. Even years ago, before you were famous. She'd say, I had a student once, tall boy, not very musical, but he listened. He had discipline. He's going to do something important. Clint smiled. She saw things in people they didn't see in themselves. She saw it in you. Here's what those 3 days in November 1987 teach us. Clint could have driven past that car. could have assumed it was just another transient and kept going, but he stopped. He looked. He recognized someone who'd helped him 35 years earlier. He didn't just give her money. He built her a house, gave her a piano, gave her dignity in her final days. She had 3 days, just 3 days in that house. Some people would say that's tragic, that he should have found her sooner, that 3 days isn't enough. But Margaret's note said otherwise. She died happy. She died safe. She died in a home with a piano after months of sleeping in a car. Those 3 days mattered. Sometimes timing is perfect. Sometimes it's painful. But showing up even late is better than not showing up at all. Margaret Chen taught Clint discipline in 1952. Clint gave Margaret dignity in 1987. She had 3 days to enjoy it. But those were 3 days she wouldn't have had if he'd kept driving. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to show up for someone who showed up for you.